In the world of cardiology, there is a fierce debate going on. It's all about bad cholesterol and this one simple question: just how low should it really go? For a long time, the mantra was simple: lower is better. But some experts have been raising a red flag, worried we might be taking things too far. Well, a huge new study is out, and it might finally give us an answer. Okay, so on one side of the argument, you have a viewpoint that's been championed by a lot of prominent doctors. The idea is really straightforward. When it comes to LDL, or what we call bad cholesterol, there's just no floor. The lower you can possibly get it, the better off you'll be. But then you have the complete opposite view. For years, the author of our source material, Professor Lin, has been warning against this exact idea, this race to the bottom. His argument? Sure, lowering LDL is important, but there's a line, a point where it stops being helpful and might actually become dangerous, especially, he says, when those levels drop below 25. And that conflict right there sets the stage perfectly for what we're going to break down today. We're going to dive into this debate, look at the history of these warnings, and then really get into the nitty-gritty of a major new study that puts two different cholesterol targets head to head. So let's be clear, the crucial question here isn't about everybody. It's specifically about high-risk patients, people who've already had a heart attack or a stroke. For them, is there a limit? Is there a point of diminishing returns when you push LDL cholesterol lower and lower? That's what a brand new study set out to discover. All right, let's move on. Because you should know, this isn't some new concern for the author we're looking at today. He's been watching this push for extremely low LDL levels for the better part of a decade, and he's been consistently questioning this narrative that there's no such thing as too low. And this timeline really tells the story. You can see his consistent skepticism. All the way back in 2018, he was questioning a proposed target range of 15 to 50. By 2022, he was pointing out that some physicians were actually bragging about having personal LDL levels down around 25, which all led up to his very recent warning that these ultra-low levels are just not good. So, right into the middle of this long simmering debate lands a huge new piece of evidence. We're talking about a major clinical trial published in March of 2026 in one of the most respected medical journals on the planet. The goal was to finally bring some hard data to the table. The study was designed to answer a very specific and very important question. If you have a patient who's already had heart disease, is it actually better to push their LDL cholesterol all the way down below 55? Or is the standard target of 70 good enough? Does going that extra mile actually prevent more heart attacks? So how in the world did they figure this out? Well, let's pop the hood and take a look inside the design of this really big, randomized trial that was conducted over in South Korea. First off, this thing was massive. The researchers enrolled more than 3,000 patients. And these weren't just any patients. Every single one of them had a history of cardiovascular disease. So we're talking about a group of people at very high risk for having another heart attack or stroke. They took all these patients and randomly split them into two groups. The traditional group got treatment with the goal of getting their LDL below the standard 70. But the intensive group, they got a much tougher assignment: get that LDL below 55. So after 3 years of this, what happened? Well, the intensive group did get a lower average LDL, down to 56. But here's what's so fascinating. It was actually harder to do. By the third year, only about 61% of them had actually hit their super low target. Compare that to the traditional group, where 68% hit their easier target. It just shows you how tough it is to get down below 55. But, and this is the big but, here's the payoff. Even though it was harder to hit that lower target, the results were absolutely dramatic. The group aiming for 55 had a major cardiovascular event rate of just 6.6%. The other group, 9.7%. That is a huge reduction in risk. And the benefit gets even sharper when you drill down into the details. Just look at non-fatal heart attacks. The rate in the intensive group was a tiny 0.8%. In the traditional group, it was 1.7%. We're talking more than double the risk. And it's the same story when you look at procedures like getting a stent or having bypass surgery. The need for those kinds of interventions was way lower in the group with the more aggressive cholesterol target, dropping all the way from 7.5% down to 4.8%. Okay, so after 3 years of tracking these thousands of patients, the data was pointing in one very clear direction. So let's look at the official verdict, and maybe, just as importantly, the tools that doctors had to use to get these results. The study's conclusion was, well, unambiguous. They found that for patients who already have heart disease, aiming for an LDL level below 55 is just plain superior to the old standard of 70. It does a better job of preventing more heart attacks, strokes, and other big problems. But how on earth did they get patients to that ultra-low target? Let me tell you, it wasn't easy. The study made it clear that just taking a statin often wasn't going to cut it. Doctors had to follow this step-by-step approach, layering on other medications when they needed to. The second step in that playbook was often a pill called ezetimibe. Now, it works in a totally different way than statins. It basically just blocks your gut from absorbing cholesterol from your food in the first place, giving you that extra bit of lowering power. And for the biggest punch, the final step, doctors could add a third medication, a super powerful injectable drug called a PCSK9 inhibitor. And this brings us right back to the beginning, doesn't it? These are the exact types of powerful drugs that Professor Lin was worried about, the ones he saw other physicians using to drive their own LDL down to those levels of 25 that he felt were so dangerous. So let's zoom out. What does this landmark study really mean for the future of treating high-risk patients? It really looks like we have a new number to aim for. So let's just recap the key takeaways here. For patients with existing heart disease, the evidence is now incredibly strong that 55 is the new 70. Hitting this target is just better at preventing another event. But, and it's a big but, it often requires a pretty aggressive multi-drug approach. And importantly, the study found that this intensive treatment was just as safe as the traditional way. And that leaves us with one final fascinating question. This study gives a really powerful answer in the 55 versus 70 debate, no doubt. But it hasn't really settled that underlying concern about this race to the bottom. As our medicines get even more powerful, is the target just going to keep dropping? From 70 to 55, maybe to 40 next? Where, if anywhere, do we finally draw the line?